Thank you, Mr. President. I also rise today to ask that we vote to pass SJ1 to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. Over 100 constitutions across the world have some form of equality provision similar to the ERA, including every constitution adopted since World War II. It is time that ours does as well. For me and many in this room, this is personal. Over 100 years ago, my great-grandfather, born 4 years after emancipation, on a plantation, had to pass a literacy test and find 3 white men to vouch for him before he could register to vote. The fact that I stand here today to present this resolution on this floor shows we have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Given our history, it is poetic justice that Virginia be the 38th state to ratify the ERA. And this historic year, it is poetic justice that we do that, especially given the 400-year trajectory of our Commonwealth. In 1619, the men of Jamestown recognized that if Virginia was going to be a permanent settlement, they needed women. So they recruited women to, quote, make wives to the inhabitants. So in May of 1620, the first women responded to that recruitment, but their rights were surrendered to their husbands. They could not vote. They could not hold public office. They could not own property. Other women and men who came months earlier were considered property and had even fewer rights. But in 1776, the Declaration of Independence established the principle that all men are created equal with inalienable rights. They meant that at the time. Some men. In 1789, as her husband was on his way to the Constitutional Convention to form a brand new government based on the ideals of the Declaration of Independence, Abigail Adams implored her husband and his fellow delegates, remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. They didn't. The Constitution was developed for we, the people, in order to form a more perfect union. It purported to create a government by, of, and for the people. But at that time, it didn't include all the people. And the past 230 years have been a struggle to make that true for all of us. Liberty and justice for all. And in the past 230 years, we have made major progress to secure the blessings of liberty for every American. But we've made that progress thanks to the struggle and sacrifices of abolitionists, the civil rights movement, the suffrage movement, the women's movement. It's been slow. With ratification of the 15th Amendment 150 years ago this year, African American men were given the right to vote. It took another 50 years for women to gain the right to vote 100 years ago. But not until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were barriers to voting for Black men and women struck down based on the foundation laid years before. We've seen progress in this very body, slowly. Also 150 years ago this year, the first African American men were sworn in to serve in the General Assembly. But it took another 54 years before Sarah Lee Fain and Helen Timmons Adams became the first women elected to the General Assembly. It wasn't until the year I was born that Eva Mae Fleming Scott became the first woman to serve in this body. And it was another 13 years in 1985 before Yvonne Miller became the first African-American woman to serve in the General Assembly. And this year, we've already made history with the most diverse General Assembly ever seated, with the most diverse leadership, with the most diverse committee chairs. And yet, in so many areas, we still have a long way to go. Whether it's the boardrooms, whether it's the highest offices in states or in the country, too often women are not there because they've had to overcome years of discriminatory laws. The Equal Rights Amendment will take a major step in the long march towards equality. It's a march my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother knew well. I'm honored to follow in their footsteps, but I don't want to leave this fight unfinished for my daughter, or her daughter, or hers. And I want to be able to tell both Samantha and Jack when I come home that the U.S. Constitution guarantees both of their rights under the law. That's really what this is about. It's our time. We've waited long enough, and I ask that we pass the resolution.
Thank the senator.